do you like podcasts?
So I want to, when I was about the age that most of you are here in this room, I used to listen to Yuva Vani, and there used to be this guy who used to do a music show, and he was outstanding, and I used to love him. And then one day, they announced that he had died, and I felt so moved and so upset that I thought that I should find out where he lived and send his parents a note saying that how much their son had sort of had meant to me as a listener. And then, of course, it turned out that the guy had played a prank, a really stupid thing to do, because he was back on the show the next week. And again, I was very angry. But this stayed with me because I realized the kind of impact that just listening to someone's voice over the weeks had on me. And radio, as most of you who have heard it will know, it's a it's one of the most mediums, because it's directly coming into your ears, and it's a really intimate relationship. So that is what always stayed with me. And as the podcasting boom took off in the West, I began to listen to many podcasts. One of the podcasts I listen to very often is The Daily by the New York Times, where this host called Michael Barbaro, he interviews journalists from New York about the big story of the day. So it's very interesting that you read the story in print, and then you hear those journalists talk about the stories and the different angles that they bring to it. So that was really the reason I wanted to do the podcast, and I think it's a great medium for journalists and, of course, for listeners to understand what's going on in the world.
Thank you, Meenal. Beautifully put. For the benefit of all of us in the audience, Supriya, can you help explain in basic layman terms, what is a podcast?
Hi, Kiruba, and hi, everyone. Now that you've put me on the spot, I feel like I have an exam question to answer, and I'm worried about getting it wrong. My understanding of a podcast has always been that it is something that you can serially stream over the internet. So episodically, it's something that you can stream. You don't have to it's not appointment listening. So it's not like at 8 o'clock you have to turn it on to listen to it, the way that you sometimes do on the radio, right? You have to listen to the news at 8 o'clock. You can listen to a podcast at any time. And in my understanding, it's purely audio. But that's not true, is it?
That's right. Podcast predominantly is assumed to be audio, but podcast as a term can be applicable to both audio and video as well. Yeah. So like Supriya said, actually, she nailed it, because, see, if you go and download an MP3 file, right, that would be just a single audio to listen to. But what if you subscribed to that, and then automatically the next episodes start coming onto your app, your podcasting app? It's simple. It's almost equivalent to your newspaper, right? Do you go every day morning to a shop and buy a newspaper? You don't. You subscribe to a newspaper once, and then magically the next day the newspaper is at your doorstep. A podcast is almost similar, excepting that your next episodes comes to your app, and it's already downloaded and easy for you to listen to. So I think that's the beauty of podcast. And if you know anything, and all you guys are all youngsters, and I'm sure all of you have the attention span less than that of a goldfish, right? We're all youngsters. There's just so many other distractions out there. So you want something that is light, that is quick and easy for you to listen to. That's one. So I want to tell you a background story why this is super important. So Mr. Kamlesh, he actually drove in from Delhi yesterday to come to this conference. He left at 4 o'clock in the evening, and guess what time he reached here? He reached Jaipur at 3:30 in the morning. Right? That's an insanely long. Now, podcasts are actually custom built for somebody like someone who's stuck in a car, or who have a long commute, waiting at the airport, going in buses, because, and I want you to fill that up, Kamlesh, for you. Why are you fascinated with podcasts, and what got you hooked on? Because he oversees 16 podcasts 16 podcasts at the India Today group. Kamlesh?
That I oversee 16 podcasts is my job. It's like work for me. But fascination for podcasts comes from the radio days. And what podcasts did was, in this age when everybody is watching a video, and people will now have to shift to audio. Because we have a huge unemployment problem in this country. Till then, YouTube is doing very well. But once you're employed, you can hear things, but you can't actually sit down and see. So I find this ironic that people watch podcasts. There are two people talking on a screen and they're watching them. Actually, this can be done by your ears. Now, I don't think podcasts are made to be short, quick, or anything. I do a podcast myself. I'm involved in it. I'm one of the 3 people who do a podcast which is 2 hours long. And it's painful for us. So I always believed that people would want shorter. So let's do a 1-hour show once. So 1 week we did a 1.5-hour show and people started complaining, writing angry letters. कि कटौती क्यों कर रहे हो?
Wow.
Yeah, 2 hours. I don't know who has the time, but I checked the data. On Apple, it was not available for Android. On the Apple ecosystem, 85% of the listeners listen to the entire podcast.
A complete 2-hour podcast.
Yes, they find time. So that means people in their commute or working in the kitchen, watching say their flowers, they listen to podcasts, and it's possible to do something else while not losing attention to podcasts, to whatever you're listening. That is one, and obviously the generation that is here has notorious for having short attention span, which I dispute. These guys watch one movie or a series. I don't touch series. Like somebody was talking about Peaky Blinders. Said, "Itna season ho gaya," and they watch it in like 2 nights. Their attention span is not the problem. They are very short, what they call consideration span. You have to tell me what you are going to tell me in the story right when I start listening. So if there are promises of a podcast or a film or a series being worthwhile, they have all the time to listen to watch.
Yeah, beautifully put. So there are 2 things that Kamlesh debunked, right? So the first one is attention is not the problem, but contextual relevance. If you truly love the subject, you will take the time out to listen more or watch more about that subject. I think that's a beautiful point that you made. So interestingly, Kamlesh, there was also the world's top 10 podcast list was taken, and 7 out of the 10 podcasts were over 1 hour long. So you're correct. Long format podcasts actually work.
That's a problem, actually. Some of the podcasts I listen to The Seen and the Unseen by Amit Verma. It has, I think, broken all records. It has gone over 5 hours.
Yes.
If I remember, one episode was almost 5.
I think one of the episodes was 7 hours.
7 hours. Wow.
But I did listen to all of it.
Got it. So for someone, now we've kind of laid the background into what podcasting is and why it makes sense, because in the US, it's a big hit. In India, it's just about rearing its head, and I think we have a long way to go before it becomes mainstream. But for youngsters out here, the fact that they've taken the time out to come to talk journalism on a Saturday morning means that these are the kind of gang that is willing to try something new. So if the audience here wants to get started, take baby steps on podcasting, what advice would you give, Supriya? Would you want to take a shot at it?
I think my first piece of advice would actually be to find a friend. It can be lonely to do anything on your own. In this case, you don't have to. You know, if you were writing a book, you'd have to sit down and do it on your own. A podcast is always better, I think, if you have more voices. Not always, but sometimes. My favorite podcast actually has only one voice, which maybe I'll tell you guys about later. Find a friend. Don't be intimidated by the medium. You are very free. It can be as conversational as you like. And I would say don't be constrained by the format, which also, as Kiruba was saying, you don't have to think of it as, you know, an expert piece of audio that you're putting out. I mean, so many of you are so used to, you know, making reels already. Or you may have YouTube channels of your own. And a podcast is simply something that allows you to call people's attention to a story or a subject that you are interested in a particular way. You are using your language, you are using your words. And in that sense, it's in continuation with what you already do when you make a reel about, you know, a cool new place that you went to, or, I don't know, complaining about your teachers. I don't know if people do that on reels. I think maybe you should do more of it if you don't.
Yeah, beautiful. So Meenal is credited with co-founding the podcast division at Times of India, and that's a big thing, right? You don't come from the new age medium. You've been a newspaper person all time through. So I'm very curious to know, how did you get that, the confidence to step into new media, from traditional media to new media, and talk to us about your experience of starting something from scratch, a podcast division from scratch.
So basically what I was doing at the podcast was not very different from what I was doing in the newspaper. And you know, it has to really begin with wanting to tell a story and to be curious. I think the medium is not that important. Of course, there are technicalities that you need to follow with each medium. But I think if you're interested, you're curious in meeting people, talking to them, you're interested in what's happening around the world, then the format, medium really doesn't matter. Everything stems from the desire to tell a particular story. And I think podcast lends itself very beautifully to it because it allows to break the barriers in many ways, especially if you're starting out your own podcast. You can have it. It can be conversational. It can be more formal, interview style. So that's it, really. I mean.
Can I ask you a question? I'm going to ask you a question. How did you get into podcasts and become a podcaster? I think the thing that connects Kamlesh, Meenal, and I is that as journalists, this is one of the media through which we tell stories. How did you come to it, and what was your first experience in podcasting?
Great, awesome. So my first experience in podcasts is that I've always been very fascinated with successful people. People who are top CEOs in companies, people who are sporting superstars or done big in the movie business. It's very difficult to go in and get access to them, just like all of us. So what I did was I started an interview show, and the minute you do, it's much easier to open doors and have conversations, as against someone who just wants to just have a talk. But the minute you package that into a nice show, and that opened doors. But more importantly, it's not really the show that I was really fascinated about. I was very fascinated about what is the secret sauce behind their success, and what can we imbibe from that. And instead of just me benefiting from that, can I pass it on to the larger audience? So I did a show with the Hindu business line called Movers and Shakers. We would have conversations with top CEOs, your Nandan Nilekenis, your Azim Premjis of the world, the usual suspects. So that's how it really came about. And I thoroughly enjoyed the medium because it's very easy for people to consume. Because it was an audio show, there was no you didn't have a camera crew, because if you did a video show, then you need lighting, you need cameras. All I did was I would have a small audio recorder. I would have 2 microphones, one connected to the person, one to me, and that's all. It was so simple, so very easy. And then there was a fantastic audio editing tool called Audacity, which is free and one of the world's best. So you do the interview in exactly in 1 hour's time, 1.5 hours time, you have the show ready and put it up. So it was that really fascinated me to the power of podcasts. Yeah. So which I'm going to dovetail into. Thanks for asking that question, Supriya. I want to dovetail into the same thing. So Kamlesh, you have 16, and your podcast is part of that 16, correct, Kamlesh? Now, for the benefit of all of us in the audience, what are different types of podcast that you're aware of? So if you can describe what are the different types. So for example, Supriya mentioned that her favorite podcast is one where a single person speaks. Meenal spoke about how 2 people can speak. You spoke about your podcast where 3 of you join together and do that. So likewise, are there different types? Can you explain?
There are these conventional interview podcasts that do very well because there is one person asking questions and they do not have any consideration about how the lighting is and how I'm looking. Have you heard about the double slit experiment? Even an electron behaves differently when being observed. You just put a camera and, a photon believes, oh, I'm being watched, now I have to look smarter. So, and you become dishonest immediately. Podcasts offer you that anonymity because you are not seen, and you are a little more authentic and more honest about things. When I do the podcast I talk about a lot of taboo subjects and generally nudge people into what I consider the right direction. But if I was doing it on a video, my clip will become viral and I won't be able to live. So podcasts give you that, if your voice is not famous, all the best. If you can change the voice, it's great. But you can do it on a single app. I should not name them, but yeah, it's very popular. It's called Anchor. You can download it and become a podcaster overnight. Don't do it. The number of podcasts in the universe is more than the number of listeners or people on this planet, is because lots of people tried it so easy, so they did 1 episode and forgot about it. So don't do it unless you have a story to tell or something to share that you think you can do regularly. Please go ahead and create your own podcast because the entry barrier is very low. You don't need an organization supporting you. You cannot make any money right now from podcasts, but you don't have to spend any money on it. So you can afford it.
Yeah, I expected all of you to walk outside the room as soon as Kamlesh said there's no money to be made. But the fact that you're sitting down is
No,
good.
but they are not making money
Either ways.
shooting reels either.
Yeah, true. So I'm going to play the devil's advocate here, Kamlesh, right? So Kamlesh said that it's very easy to start a podcast. All you have to do is go to anchor.fm or go to any of these podcasting apps. It's like in under 1 minute you can start. But Kamlesh has a very good point. It's very easy to start a podcast, but it's difficult to maintain consistency. So on the beauty of, and the true beauty of a good podcaster is the same thing as the true beauty of an Instagrammer. If you posted just 1 reel once in 3 months, what are you? But if you start doing that on a regular basis, that's when you gain followership and you gain the clout. Similarly, podcast also requires, I think that's where the intention, with the good intention that Kamlesh is saying, that don't start just because on a whim, have a story to tell and think slightly long term. So the devil's advocate statement that I'm going to make, Kamlesh, is that everybody has to crawl first before they can walk. Right? Everyone's podcast will suck. I can give it to you in writing. It's just like how we all do bad things in any first Insta reel, go and check, first video that you did, first article that you wrote, all of it will be bad. So should we not get the benefit of doubt and have a slightly longer runway for us to experiment with any medium?
See, when a child is very small, it poops all over the place. It's only the parents. There are just 2 people in the audience, or 3 or 4 or 5 maybe. So when you start, you'll suck, it's fine. You won't have any audience either. Your mom, your dad, your brother, your friend. Then you grow up, and then your followership increases. You know, in podcasts, maybe 10,000. Then the whole world knows how stupid you are. There is risk always in being famous. But podcasts right now won't make you famous. Podcasts will give you a new world to explore, where you can play with your voice, the topics that you choose to speak about, research that you do about the subject that you speak about, to a smaller interested audience. Right now, podcasts have not reached the YouTube level, thank God, that, you know, it just appears on your timeline. Suddenly a random guy is speaking, you know, whatever he wants to, and you are thinking, what did... This has not happened to podcasts. Podcasts are still looked for, selected, followed, and, you know, all my podcasts are people that I want to listen to. So you won't have that problem of becoming famous or viral if you're on a podcast platform. Please try. Everybody should try.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Kamlesh. You know, podcasting in a way reminds me of this Dronacharya Arjuna episode, right? So Arjuna has this arrow, bow and arrow, and Dronacharya asks, do you see the tree? He says, no. Do you see the bird? He says, no. What the hell do you see? I see the eye of the bird. Now let go of the arrow, right? So in a way, the beauty of the podcast is in nicheness. The more smaller the medium that you're picking, the area of expertise that you're picking, the greater your chances of success. Actually, Supriya runs a media company. At All Things Small, she also produces shows for brands. So talk to us about that experience and give us an example, Supriya, of a branded show, podcast show that you produce.
Thanks, Kiruba. One of the things that happens when you run a small media company, as opposed to if you're working for a big media house, is that you immediately have to figure out where the money comes from, right? You have to make enough so that you can make the next one. You don't have that runway where you say, oh, let me try something for 2 or 3 years. And the way media companies in India currently make money off podcasts are through they have 2 streams. One is you make original podcasts for platforms. So you make that Spotify original. Maybe you guys have heard that. And the other way to do it is to associate with a brand that wants a podcast, that feels like its story can be told best through a podcast. And the best way to do that is. One of the things that I worked on recently was an association with Microsoft, who came to us, they came to our company and said, hey, we really want to tell stories about artificial intelligence in India, because, you know, most people hear the words AI and machine learning, and they're like, oh, science, like, you know, this is like high tech, this is stuff, I don't really know what's going on. We want Indian readers and listeners, audiences, to understand that this is very much a part of their lives. So we helped produce a podcast for them, called Paradigm Shift, which was narrated by Harsha Bhogle. That was, you know, another thing that they wanted. They said, let's bring in a familiar voice. So you may not be interested, you may not think you're interested in AI, but you listen to it because it's Harsha and you associated him with cricket commentary, and let him make these stories real to you. And that turned out to be exactly, that turned out to work out very well for them, because it did exactly what they wanted. It took a subject that many people in their audience thought was very arcane and made it seem very everyday and familiar. That is one way in which brands in India are using podcasts to tell their stories and get the word out to audiences who are not, they're not looking for 10 million views on YouTube, right? Which is kind of the big thing that brings me sometimes on. They're like, no, I want Kiruba and Kamlesh to listen to this and understand what I'm trying to communicate. That was that.
Super. Super. Thanks for that. That's an excellent example of what you did with Microsoft and AI. So, Meenal, you spent 15 years in Mumbai Mirror, and that's where the hyper-localization of news is something that's really worked very well. People want to know what's in the city, in their neighborhood. So, do you think podcast can become the digital version of hyper-local information?
Absolutely. I think podcast, the future is actually there because the big stories require very high production values. They require a lot of monetary investments, whereas the smaller stories, the hyper-local stories, are something that everyone can do. The whole idea of citizen journalists, for instance. I mean, you can just go in if there's a civic problem in your area, or if there's somebody who's done really well in, say, IITs, and you can go and do a quick interview. So these are the things that you can really put up. But I just want to say two things here. I think the one challenge which we don't talk about enough with podcasts is that audio is one medium where it's the most difficult to sustain people's interests. It's, you can be watching a film or TV, in a film, not in a cinema hall, but if you're watching on TV, you can do 10 other things. You can be reading a newspaper or magazine or a book. You can put it down, come back to it. With podcasts, if you're listening, you're, say, in a bus or in a taxi, you can keep listening but lose track. So it's really important and very difficult to hold the listener's attention. So it requires a very high level of what I would say editorial control. So while it's easy to say that, okay, everyone can do podcasts, and of course they can, but as content creators, you need to be very aware that it needs to be very tightly structured and very tightly edited. It may not sound like that, but it needs to be very tightly structured. So I think that's a big challenge that I'm sure Kamlesh and everyone faces.
Thanks for that, Meenal. So I'm going to open it up for questions if any of you have. I doubt if you have any questions, so thank you for breaking my thing. So let's hand over the mic and just state your name, what do you do, and ask your question. If you want that question to a specific person, tell who you want the question for. Yes, please.
First of all, hello everyone. My name is Riya Chaube. I'm currently a journalism student. And I want to ask you a question that as you have experience in podcast, so I would like to know that what is the genre or a beat in which people are most interested in? Because there are a number of genres and beat we listen to, but there must be particular or 2 or 3 main genres which people like most. So this is my question.
Right up your alley.
It's an oxymoron. It's called self-help. They listen to, read books. There is a certain class of people. There are books that are called self-help books, which obviously, if you need help of a book, it is not self-help. The self-help now works in podcast as well, and you can see why. Everyone needs not just advice, but there is the need for confirmation that what I'm doing is right. So the Indian Babas, if you can become a Baba, will do the best, but don't try to do that. Self-help is a very big genre. Second is, unfortunately or unfortunately, politics. Politics works really well. Third, as I remember, I call that knowledge. If you read books on my behalf and then tell me the stories, people love it. We have a best-selling podcast called Padhaku Nitin, where this boy reads on a particular subject of some contemporary relation, and then tells you about everything that he knows. in half an hour. This works very well. So if you are a journalism student and you've learned, if you have read 4 books about journalism, and you can put your thoughts in order in a 20-minute capsule, record it as an MP3 and share on WhatsApp with your friends, you have a podcast.
Thank you
You're
so
right,
much,
Kamlesh.
sir.
Actually, one of the most successful genres, you have these book summary apps like Blinkist, right? They are very short format. You don't have to wait through 300 pages of book or listen to 7 hours of audio book, and they distill it within 7 minutes and 8 minutes, and it's super popular. In fact, Supriya, you ran a book column for Mumbai Mirror, thanks to Meenal. So would that not be a great thing? I mean, you were writing the written word, right? Book summaries. Would it not make a...
Yeah, I ended up doing exactly what I spoke about earlier in the session, which was start a books podcast with a friend of mine who's also a book reviewer. And we just started, as we said, we do 20-minute episodes. We talk about books that we're interested in or writers that we're interested in. And we found a producer, and we've done 2 seasons of it. It's called The Lip Pickers. It has a very small audience, but a very committed audience, which I think is something we've been talking about as well, right? That you hit a niche that, even if 50 people want to listen to it, you're giving them exactly what they want quite easily. So yeah, you're right. It sounds great. People love listening to recaps. All of you already know this because you see this on YouTube, where some of the most popular YouTubers are simply just telling you what happened on Game of Thrones, which maybe some of you are now too young to remember. It was a hit show a few years ago. Or hey, this is what happens in Harry Potter. I think that the pleasure of listening to someone narrate that stuff to you. I started listening to Ponniyin Selvan, the great Tamil novel, which runs into many volumes, that someone narrated. So they don't read it as an audiobook. They simply tell you in extremely conversational Tamil, which even I can understand or partly understand, oh, these are the events of this book. And I realized what the charm of that was. So, if some of you are in the habit of consuming large books, please break them down for us in your podcast. We'll happily listen.
There you go. Awesome. You had a follow-up question, ma'am? Please go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Ruchika Jain, a video content creator, and Akashwani Radio and now podcast. We have evaluated a lot. But if somebody wants, it used to if somebody wants to job in Akashwani or radio, we have to apply through it. But now on the platform like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, anybody can start it. But my question is how to earn in long term and how to rely on this, because still you have, as ma'am said, you have a small audience. So yeah.
Where is the moolah? How can independent podcasters earn money? Because by earning money, they can sustain the passion. Otherwise, it'll be a time stealer. So how do we make money? Kamlesh?
I really don't know if anybody could make money, I would, but but don't get disheartened. It's not exactly about making money. It's about what do you want to, I'll sound a little philosophical, but do you have a story to tell? If you have a story to tell, you will find listeners. It's a small number now, so it's a small audience, but advertisers don't sell time. Or advertisers don't sell space in a newspaper. If a salesman goes to an advertiser and says, I have this much space, can you buy it? Nobody will buy. You sell audience. So your audience is small, too small to monetize. Monetize is a word that we often use in our business. Too small. But you are not the size of your audience. You can then get into videos, you can write, build your brand. And then anything you do will be sold. There will be buyers, takers for it, if not buyers. There will be an audience and I don't know, money is not the purpose here. Purpose is to build an audience which money is a byproduct of.
I think it's very important to take a very hard look at yourself and say what value are you bringing to whoever the listener is. That's very important because you have to, if there's such a, there's so many podcasts, there's so much media coming at us every day, whether it's newspapers, podcasts, TV, YouTube channels, digital websites. I think it's really important, how are you going to stand out? This brand building that Kamlesh speaks about. What is your brand all about? Who is it appealing to? So I think it's really important to, whether you're targeting a niche, whether you're, so be very, very clear about what you're going to talk about and be the expert in that. I think that's really one of the key things to do.
You described yourself as a content creator, and so I think you actually have a much better idea about how to monetize something like a podcast than any of us on stage do. So we can talk more about that. But the strategy, the strategies that you follow, right? You build an audience so that you might have a platform come and tell you, hey, make something for us specifically, or a brand comes to you and says, I'll give you money to talk about a subject that I'm interested in. Or your listeners come to you and support you, which is kind of the bedrock of the creator economy, right? Those are all ways in which podcasts also run. They do run in the same way in India. The problem I sense, and what you wanted to, what you might have wanted like a kind of long view on, is how is any of this sustainable? And I think that's very difficult for any of us to say at this point, because we don't know how platforms are going to behave. All of you have been reading the news about how Instagram has changed its algorithm, which means that a lot of creators, are now have to figure out how to crack the business in a whole new way. We don't know how regulation is going to work. Tomorrow, if the IT rules introduce, they can introduce one line about podcasts and put us all out of business. I think those are things that we all have to navigate, and which means that we can't give you any concrete answers for the long term.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just want to close this argument with a personal experience of mine. My 90-year-old grandma runs a farm stay with 2 farmhouses. And there was this lady who came and came and stayed. She shot a 20-second Insta reel. And that reel received 1.6 million views. And the second time she came in, she said she wanted to charge 50,000 rupees for the second reel. We were happy paying her. You know why? Because that one single reel, she only has about 25,000 followers, but that one single reel filled up 2 months of booking, right? That's 2 entire months of booking. So I completely agree with Meenal that you need 100 true fans, rabid fans. You need a smaller audience, but someone who truly gets value, like what Meenal said, right? I think that's the secret, I would feel. Don't boil the ocean. Go 1 inch wide, 1 kilometer deep, and that's your secret sauce for success. With that, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for Kamlesh, Supriya, and Meenal. Thank you so much for taking the time out and taking it. Appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. My podcast is selling now. My podcast is called Teen Tal. If you search Teen Tal, you'll find it on Google. And Padaku Nitin and Lallan Top Baja